From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. On Friday, Gazprom, the Russian energy giant, said that it would keep the Nord Stream 1 pipeline shut. And now we have some more news here in recent days about what exactly is going on here, but it's sort of a confused situation. So there's one story today that quotes a Russian official saying that there's some equipment that needs to be repaired before the pipeline can turn on, and you should go ask Siemens Energy to figure out when the pipeline will be able to reopen. Then there are quotes from representatives of Siemens saying that there's no technical reason for stopping the operation. And so, Joe, I mean, what is going on here? Is this just the latest in Vladimir Putin's energy politics as he attempts to use the leverage that he has over the EU?
Yeah, so remember, Nord Stream 1 is the main conduit for Russian natural gas into Western Europe. It flows direct from Russia under the Baltic Sea to Germany. And it has been a major supply point for Germany for several years now. And so the shutdown is a very big deal. And this is part of a longer term pattern that's been going on really since the Russian invasion of Ukraine started back in February, where Gazprom, who's the ultimate owner of the pipeline, has been steadily reducing the amount of gas that was flowing through it. And along the way, we've had a series of these shutdowns that were ostensibly for maintenance, although, as is so often the case in these situations, there was a certain amount of ambiguity about how much of that maintenance was really necessary. So back in July, there was a 10-day maintenance shutdown, and then there was a lot of concern about whether the Russians were going to reopen the pipeline on schedule. It turns out that they did, but then they reduced the capacity from pushing through about 40% of the capacity down to 20. And now, so what's new is after a 3-day really unplanned maintenance shutdown, last week they announced they're just going to keep it shut down indefinitely. And the Siemens angle is really interesting here because Russia all along has been claiming that this was maintenance related. Back in July with that 10-day shutdown, there was a big palaver about a turbine that supposedly had been undergoing maintenance in Canada and had gotten caught by Canada's sanctions against Russia. And so the Germans needed to somehow get the turbine back. And it became this big shaggy dog story about what was going on here. But everyone has long since figured out that this is a political move by the Kremlin to demonstrate that they do have the power and the willingness to shut down the pipeline. And I think that is the thing to keep your eyes on, even as they continue all of this toing and froing about the maintenance situation.
But if the intent is to break European will, European opposition to the invasion of Ukraine, I mean, the question to me is whether it seems like that's going to work. And for one thing, as long as the threat is hanging over Europe that this would happen, you could understand how that would create disunity within these European allies. But now that Vladimir Putin has pulled the trigger on the threat, it seems to me, Monet, that would only unite Europe in opposition to this. And by the way, while making sure that none of those European allies ever trust Vladimir Putin and Russia again as a source of energy. And I was struck by a line in the Journal's editorial on this subject. It says, Europe is paying for its energy dependence on Russia. Mr. Putin may pay later for exploiting it.
Right. I think the rhetoric and the plan out of the European capitals in the wake of Putin's decision to cease Nord Stream 1 is definitely going to be along the lines that you just mentioned. If we haven't already, we're definitely going to see leaders coming out and saying this shows just how vindictive Russia has become. They are trying to sort of bring us to our knees as winter approaches, but we're not going to tolerate that. And we have X, Y, and Z plans already in place to make sure that we're able to bear the increased cost of energy and keep consumers and businesses chugging along despite the challenge. So that's the outlook, and I think that's the right outlook. There are a variety of adaptations that these countries can make in order to weather that storm. We've already seen them kind of trying to stockpile energy resources, bringing online more capacity in other fuel sources like reviving coal and things like that. Hopefully starting to open up more ports so that they can import more natural gas and not depend on the gas shipped from Russia over the continent. But I also think it's going to be a huge challenge. I think you can just look back to February and March of this year and recall that it wasn't immediate it even after Russia invaded Ukraine, that these countries lined up and said, we're going to start weaning ourselves off Russian gas. And it's because they're heavily dependent on it. And their economies are already struggling quite a bit. And they know that it's going to be a major blow to be able to go without Russian imports. And so even if they come out on day one and say, we're totally committed to weathering this storm without Russian supply, there's going to be a lot of pressure on them. And as time drags on, you might see their coalition start to break down a little bit. And you very might well see some people talk about concessions that they might be able to quietly make to restore some of that supply. So I hope that that doesn't happen. It's not my expectation, but my point is merely that it's not going to be easy for them to just decide to adapt.
Joe, what's your analysis of this question of whether this leverage will work to break European unity on the Ukraine question? And then also, what do you see ahead for Europe this winter as we're now weeks away from the coming of cold weather? Are there stockpiles of gas that Europe has that can last them a while? Is there potentially rationing ahead? Or what should people be prepared for?
Well, it's going to be a pretty miserable winter over here, and I think that the best that people can hope for is that it's a mild winter, which will ease some of the pressure on gas consumption, especially for heating, because remember, many European households rely on natural gas from the local gas grid for heating. So that is a very important consideration that will be on people's minds. I think that, they've done what they could over the summer. I think in Germany in particular, you saw this great push to stockpile energy so that their gas storage facilities are filled to a much higher level today than they were on this day last year. But the problem is that storage was never intended to satisfy all of the country's energy demand over the course of the winter. So they are going to have to prepare for some kind of shortfall. And that's really where the political element is going to come in here. And also what I think is so interesting and troubling about the Kremlin's move to shut off the gas supply at this particular point. I don't think that there is any chance that we're going to go back to the position that we were in before the Ukraine war started, where Europe and Germany in particular are blithely dependent on Russian energy. I think that ship has sailed. There is now a great push to build physical infrastructure like liquefied natural gas terminals that will allow them to import more gas from elsewhere and diversify their supply permanently. So that is happening, whether the Kremlin wants it to or not. And even after the Ukraine war is over, those terminals and that other infrastructure will be there. So I think that what's happening is that there's kind of this narrow window now for Putin to try to create political mischief. And that's probably one of the goals here. Maybe he doesn't even think at this point that he can change Europe's determination on Ukraine or on diversifying energy away from Russia, but he can make it very painful for them. And so I think that a lot of this energy blackmail now might just be oriented toward mischief making. It's a kind of this attitude of, well, let's turn off the spigot for a week or two and see what happens. And sure enough, you had protests in the eastern German city of Leipzig on Monday about inflation and higher energy prices. So Putin wins from his ability to place that kind of pressure on Western European governments.
Thank you, Joe and Monet. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.